Worked at La Pasada for a little over 10 years. Never saw anything, but something did tap me on the shoulder once.
You know,
Sherry
a lot of
says, hello from Chicago. Welcome.
Wow. A lot of the stories that Peter and I get are from employees or former employees that come on our tour and then tell us their stories, which is really cool because sometimes we then incorporate them into our next tour.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Hey, there's Phoenix.
Welcome, Dolores. We have about 81 attendees so far. And so we're just waiting about 5 more minutes to get started. Thank you all for being here with us.
Yeah, I think it'd be great if people want to put in the chat where they're joining us from.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's great to see. I'm glad you'll be joining us on a tour of Santa Fe. Terry says, hello all. I'm excited to hear about Santa Fe. My husband used to work security at most of the downtown Plaza hotels. And he would tell us stories as we drive through the plaza.
Fun.
Chris says, my husband worked at La Pasada as well. Donald's from Santa Fe. Don's from Albuquerque, Tuba City, Las Vegas, New Mexico, Rancho Viejo, Taos, Nambe, yay, New Mexico, Massachusetts, Glorieta, Boulder, woo, Colorado's
Yay,
here.
Colorado.
That's right, there's a fire.
Yeah. Got our Santa Feans, Ojo Caliente, hello. Alamogordo, South Capitol. Welcome, everyone.
There goes
now we have, we just keep getting more participants. Welcome, everybody. We'll be starting here in a couple minutes. New Jersey, welcome.
Wow,
Mona
that's a long
says
way.
that the whole street on where La Pasada is located is haunted. And Mona, I believe, is the one who messaged us earlier. I can't wait to hear from you later on.
Hey, Annette. Annette says, I'm so excited for the tour. This is my second time on the tour. Boo-boo. It's not exactly going to be a tour, but it'll be similar.
Yeah. We do have some more Palace Avenue stories that I think Peter's going to tell tonight, which that's the street that La Pasada is on, right, Peter?
Right. Yeah, Mona's saying that street is haunted. There's a couple of houses up that street beyond La Pasada I've heard stories about, but I don't remember them. It was a long time ago.
That's where all of the beautiful old Victorians are, up that street, right?
There's some, yeah. Nambe.
We have Spokane, Washington here. Hello.
Spokane.
And has property in Aura.
All right. Have you guys heard of the St. James Hotel in Cimarron, New Mexico? Is that
I have heard of it.
I have. I know people that have stayed there, but I haven't.
Supposed to be very haunted as well, right?
I'll have to look that up.
I know I've always wanted to stay there because I hear it is really scary. So I don't know if I could handle it.
Rose
I know I'm
says,
always torn. I'm like, I want to see these places, but I don't know that I want to stay there.
Stephanie
I've always
says,
wanted an experience, but I think I want it too much that I'm just boring to ghosts. So it'll never haunt me. Rose says that we currently are dealing with a ghost in our house. I'm excited to hear about all the other ghost stories.
I hope it's a friendly ghost, Rose.
Yeah, I hope so.
Several people have said they've been to the hotel there in Cimarron, St. James.
Nice. Well, it is 5 p.m. Are you two ready to get started?
Sure.
All right. We have 152 people with us this evening. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. The structure of tonight's event will first be an introduction, and then a presentation from the original Santa Fe Ghost Tour. We'll have time to answer questions. Just write it right in the chat box or that Q&A you see, and we'll address them at the appropriate times. We'll also take comments, and you'll have a chance to share your own ghost story. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to type it in. You're in the chat box there, and we'll address them. Well, let's get started. Please welcome Peter Sinclair, who has been leading the original Santa Fe Ghost Tour since 1993. Peter has interacted with over 20,000 ghost walkers. So on the tour, you may hear about the experiences of tour participants with the Santa Fe spirits, as well as the many Santa Fe spirits themselves. Joining Peter is Kandra Payne, the author of Haunted Creede and the ghost tour guide here in Santa Fe, as well as Creede, Colorado. On that note, I'll leave it to our ghost historians to take us on a tour of Santa Fe. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank everyone who showed up here. It's great. We may get a few more, knowing people from this area. 5 o'clock is not a precise time. But I'm grateful that you could come. And I always like to start off a tour, and this is not exactly a tour, but it's very appropriate for what we're doing. And that is by asking those that are here, who believes in ghosts, who doesn't believe in ghosts, who's skeptical, who's had experiences or has had one experience. If you could type in the chat, it'd be great to see. And then Kandra and I will answer the question. One believer, 100%. I don't know if everyone knows how to use chat, but I want to believe, I won't believe, I believe, skeptical, but fun stuff anyway. Skeptic, good. We've got some skeptics, that's what I always like. Boy, here they go. You can't see Kandra, can you?
No, I can't.
Uncommitted, believe. I've had many experiences. Yes, I've had experiences. I grew up in New Mexico, absolutely believe. I'm believing right now, open to what I believe, undecided, maybe. They're going faster than I keep up with them all.
Mostly believers, though, it sounds like.
So Belgium is on, I guess. They said, don't believe in ghosts, never had a ghost experience, but definitely love a good story. I believe, but no experiences. Convince me. 2 non-believers, we like entertaining stories, I believe. I'm skeptical, but I feel I've had an experience. Yeah, that's interesting. I've had some real skeptical people who've had experiences they can't explain, that you'd have to put in a paranormal category. I've seen a ghost. Uncle died in 1995. Soon after, I saw a misty presence in the living room. It was scary. So I don't know if everyone can see the chat. I know Kandra can't because she's a screen share, so that's why I'm reading them out. Thank you all for those comments. My grandparents' house was haunted. I do believe in ghosts. I believe as I have paranormal experiences, totally believe. I've had a ghost experience too. So there's lots of responses. Thank you. So I'll answer the question in maybe a little more roundabout way. When I'm a tour guide. I do other kinds of tours. I was doing tours to Bandelier and other places for a company in Santa Fe in 1993. And they said, we started this ghost tour and we've got someone doing it, but we need another person. This was like early in 1993, spring or something. By Halloween, we're definitely going to need another guide. Are you interested? And I thought, sure, I need work. I'll do it. I like telling stories. But I thought, do I believe in ghosts? And I thought, I don't think I've ever had an experience with ghosts. I don't know that I believe in them, but I'll do it. I needed work, and so I took the job. Well, now having done the tour since 1993, between people on the tour and a couple of experiences I've had since then, I definitely believe in ghosts. based upon so many believable experiences. Someone gave the example there of a family member. I've had probably 300 people who've said they've had some family member pass away, and then in some way, shape, or form had an encounter or several encounters with them, usually fairly soon after their death, but their spirit is still around. And then usually not so much, although there are some who regularly experience a family member, but that's rare. So anyway, even if I'd never had a couple of experiences that I've had in the last, whatever that is, 27 years, I would believe in ghosts based upon some of my participant stories. Some I'm skeptical about, the stories I hear, but some are so believable, I know it happened to them. Kandra, what do you have to say about that?
Oh, I definitely believe. I've been hearing ghost stories since, I was a little kid. I started collecting them from my hometown, and I've heard them from people that I really trust and I believe wouldn't lie to me. And they're seeing and experiencing these things that I believe are real. So yeah, I definitely believe. And I've had a few experiences. I've never seen a ghost myself, but I've had what I consider paranormal experiences. So yeah, I believe.
So Kandra, I know you can't see the chat. When we get to the Drury or the old hospital, somebody's had an experience there, Chris. So maybe if Chris is willing, might share
Great.
his or her experience. I don't know who Chris is. But anyway, thank you all again, and we'll get into a story or two here. The first one, Kandra and I thought we would talk about. Some of you that are from this area or used to be from this area see what is called the oldest house. Currently, there's an Indian shop in there. There've been various. It's owned by the Christian Brothers, and it's a very, very old house that's built on the site of one of three pueblos, Indian pueblos that were here prior to the Spanish arrival. It isn't necessary, although the sign says oldest house in the United States, that's maybe a little of an exaggeration. It's a very old house, but if you look at the plaque on the wall, the Historic Santa Fe Foundation puts oldest house in quotation marks, because there are a couple of houses thought to be older than this one in Santa Fe. Anyway, many people have apparently lived in this house. Besides, recently there've been various businesses in there. Way back in Spanish times, we're going to go back to when this would have been lived in by different Spanish families. It was said there were two sisters that were living at this house. This house, by the way, if anyone doesn't know where it is, but you're from Santa Fe or nearby, east of Vargas Street, it's next to San Miguel Mission Church. Anyway, there were two sisters who lived in this house, and they were said to be brujas. And a number of you will know a bruja is a witch. Now, in Spanish times, people accused of witchcraft were often taken before the Inquisition. The Holy Office of the Inquisition was down in Mexico City. And local priests would often turn people in who they thought were practicing witchcraft, magic, or some other religion, particularly Judaism. Anyway, these two sisters were never brought before the tribunal of the Inquisition because they seemed to have served a purpose. It was said that a merchant concerned about a competitor opening up a shop would show up the house of the brujas and ask for a potion so that the competitor wouldn't do well. The business would go out of business. It was said that a politician might show up and ask for a spell or a potion to defeat someone who was in their opposition. Whether that's true or not, I really can't say, but I do know a story about a young man. And this young man fell in love with a young lady. And it turns out another young man was interested in the same young lady, same young woman. And so the young man came one of the young men came to get a spell, a potion from the Brujas to get the young woman to fall in love with him. And the spell was cast, and the young woman fell in love with one of the two young men, and the other young man was just distraught. And he was seen many a night at little cantina somewhere near the plaza, drinking away his time, talking about those filthy brujas who had cast this spell. And he said, he was the one who actually spent the money. He said, I spent my money and I didn't get it, I didn't even get a refund and it didn't work. And he was very upset. One night he was so angry, he went stomping out of that cantina. He walked down to the river. Those of you know Santa Fe, you cross the river, that's kind of the low point, and you walk up a hill. He walked up the hill to Vargas Street is the first street you come to. He turns left to go to the oldest house, and it's slightly uphill to get to the house. Think of an incline. And it was a dirt lane at this point. And it was said that he bangs on the door. You filthy brujas, you come out, you come out. And it's late at night, and they come to the door's open. One of the sisters, the brujas, is holding a lantern. And the man said, you took my, and he's a little unbalanced here from drinking. You took my money and she doesn't love me and you didn't give me anything back and you filthy brujas. Well, at that point he pulled out his sword and he was about to strike them, but it was uneven in the road. He was uneven in his brain and he fell over. Quick thinking bruja. One of the sisters grabs the sword and goes whoop, and cuts off his head. And it rolls down the street and disappears around the corner, heading towards the river and the plaza. So that was many years ago during the Spanish period. Fast forward to the 1800s. Some of you may know about St. Michael's School for Boys, may know St. Michael's High School today, but right next to San Miguel Mission used to be, it's now the Office of Tourism, St. Michael's School for Boys. It was a 3-story building. It's no longer as large due to a fire. And the little east of Vargas Street was really not a street. It was just a little lane still at that point. And I'm often reminded when I tell this story of the Dead Poets Society, if those of you who saw that movie with Robin Williams, many of you maybe not, but if you remember, teacher at this boarding school, his students all fall in love with poetry, and they would have this Dead Poets Society and recite their poetry, and they would get together at night, late at night, reciting poetry. Well, these boys would sneak out in this lane out of study hall and get together also, but not so much for poetry. I think it was for other things. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing with my hand, but to get a little smoke. Well, one May night, as they had gathered in the lane, all of a sudden they scream, they go running back into the school. And they call for the brother on that night was a Brother Frank. Brother Frank, Brother Frank. He was the one in study hall or on duty amongst the Christian brothers. It was a Christian brothers school. And they say, Brother Frank, Brother Frank, Brother Frank, we saw a head rolling down the hill. And people say that if you go on the right May night, you too can see that head. Some people say that he's rolling down the hill to go to the Palace of Governors to get the governor to punish those brujas who'd done him wrong. Others say he was trying to roll back to that cantina to have another drink, having had a bad night. Now, I'll tell you, a few years, how many years? 5 years, 6 years ago, there were 2 women on tour. And they owned a house in Alto Street. Those of you know, De Vargas Street kind of runs further, what direction am I talking here? West, and then Alto Street starts. They're kind of almost become each other. They're a little different, but they run in the same direction, parallel to the river. And they said that it was a vacation home for them, but they knew their neighbors. And they said after they heard this story that that some of their neighbors would see a man riding a horse, headless horseman, carrying a sword. And there's a story about the name of this person and where some say he is, and Kandra was going to talk about that.
Right. So let me go to our next picture here. So the gentleman who bought the love potion from the Brujas, they say his name was Juan Espinoza. And Juan Espinoza is, they say his bones are in this coffin, and they aren't the real bones of Juan Espinoza. But if you do visit the oldest house, you can go into this part of the museum and see the coffin. But the story I heard about the oldest house that I really enjoyed, I'm going to share it with you tonight. I heard it on my tour. Apparently there was a cashier who works at the little gift shop in the oldest house. And one day she was just working, and a very handsome Hispanic man, young man, came in, and he looked around the museum, and then he came to the gift shop, and he bought a few things. And as he was leaving, he said, "You know, I am Juan Espinoza." And the woman sort of laughed, and she said the young man got out his wallet and he took out his driver's license, and he said, "I'm Juan Espinoza." And he showed her his driver's license, and that was in fact his name. And she said, "Oh, isn't that funny? Look at," and and he looked at her very sort of deadpan and looked straight into her eyes and said, "I don't think you understand. I am Juan Espinoza from your story." And he pointed at the coffin, and then he turned around and left the store. And the cashier said she just got chills. She couldn't believe it. But I really thought that was a great story. So
Thanks,
that's my story of Juan Espinoza.
So there are a couple people having some trouble with the Zoom, and I think Jessica's trying to help you. Allison and who is it there? It's hard for me to read. Is it Solari? You want full screen? Go up the upper right corner. You can make your own full screen, I believe. And Allison, I hope you've been able to see. You say you can't see anyone talking. Jessica will try to help anyone that's having difficulty only getting audio. Okay. By the way, near that boys' school is the PERA building. We're not going to do a PERA story today unless there's somebody listening who used to work in that building and they've got a good story. We'll do it later on. So type in the chat if you did have an experience in the PERA building. So we're going to move on down towards the plaza, I think, at this point, right, Kandra?
Right. We're going.
So I'm sorry, we can't, this is not exactly a tour. You would walk around to some of these places and others. Kandra and I could probably each do a 4-hour tour. We got to, put this into in an hour here tonight, unless we want to give you some question time. So we're going to do a few other sites, but there are many sites around downtown Santa Fe area and, on out. Somebody said they were living in South Capitol. There are ghosts there. There's ghosts on up Canyon Road, places like that. Anyway, we're going to go. If some of you will recognize this photo, some of you that live elsewhere, maybe not. But this is what is today the Druid Plaza Hotel. Somebody mentioned in the chat the old hospital, and they have a story about that. I think it's Chris. The brief history. Sisters of Charity set up a hospital building on the end of what is now called Cathedral Park. And then they had a building, and it's still there. And you can see the name Marion Hall, which is a detached building from the Druid today, owned by the Druid. It's on the same property. And then in sometime, I don't know the date, there was a major expansion into what you're seeing in this photo. A big building, sort of a T, was the modern Santa Fe Hospital, St. Vincent's Hospital. Not sure when it took on St. Vincent's as a name, but anyway, some of you here probably know. Some of you were probably born here, is my guess. But anyway, it was a hospital up until, when was it? The late 70s, 76, 77, something like that. And then the state took over the property, and the Marion Hall became, which was, at least for a while when the nuns were running the hospital, was basically where they were living. They also had an orphanage there for a while. Anyway, that the whole building was, the old Marion Hall became the Office of Historic Preservation. The nearest part of the big T was the archaeological studies, and then there was La Residencia. Some of you may know, have heard stories from people who worked at La Residencia, or maybe people who were residents there in your family or something. It was a nursing home, a state nursing home. Yeah, somebody wrote Marion Hall is still creepy. Anyway, yeah, it hasn't been
picture
developed by
from Marion Hall.
There's a picture. Can you all see that of the hands in the dust in the window? Help, let me out, help. If you go to YouTube, and I didn't have time to do it, it may have been taken down. There was a YouTube of two fellows who went in there with a recording device, and they picked up sounds of voices, and there's a YouTube of it. There was, and I haven't been able to find it recently, but it may have been taken down. But you can go do a little ghost hunt if you want on YouTube. Marion Hall, Marian. Marion Hall. Thank you for your comment about the PERA building, but we'll go on here. Maybe I'll mention it later. So what happened was, in about somewhere around 2000, early 2000s, the La Residencia closed down, and over the next couple of years, the offices in the other parts of the building closed down. The building was empty and for sale. Finally, Druid bought it and waited a couple of years and then developed this hotel. And over the years, lots of things have happened to people working I hear stories of people who worked in La Residencia. You hear stories that people who were nurses in the hospital. You hear stories who cook at La Residencia and all sorts of things like that. One of the things that some of you from Santa Fe who know this is haunted may know, that I thought I would tell a blood story. People see blood.
Phantom blood.
People would see phantom blood, right? Particularly, and it often seemed to be in the area of the old hospital where La Residencia was, although I'm not sure it was exclusively there. Anyway, people reported they would see just like little puddles of blood. And then a few years back, Pasatiempo did a Halloween piece on this. They interviewed people who worked there, and a couple of the people that had worked at La Residencia said they actually saw blood ooze out of walls. And there's a famous story of a nurse down the basement in the blood. You'll have to come on the tour to hear that one and request it. Because I want to talk about someone that I met who had that I know, who's a very straightforward person. Some of you might possibly know him. Don't know if he's here. I can't flip through all there are 207 people here, to see who's here. But Phil Weston was born and raised in Santa Fe. I had somebody on a tour. His father was a doctor, gave birth to babies in that hospital. His father was her doctor. Anyway, Phil one day tells me, and I didn't know him that well, but he mentioned to me that when he was in high school, his dad got him a job at the old hospital. His dad, had hospital privileges to deliver babies there. And I said, Phil, you worked at what's now the Druid? I think it was empty at the time, actually, but the old hospital? And he says, yeah, I did. I said, that's supposed to be haunted. Do you believe it's haunted? And he said, yeah, I have to believe it's haunted because of what happened. He said, I was an orderly, so I did all the grunt work. Got maybe some children here. Orderly does all the work that the nurses and nurses' aides and doctors need. So he said, one of the things they gave me to do was I had to take all the infected stuff, and even sometimes, he said, a body part, and there was an incinerator. That's a thing that burns things up. Down below, he said there was, just below the basement, there was a sub-basement where there was an incinerator. They told him to take a cart, take the elevator all the way down. I think it was make a left, and you'll see a little sign, open the door, there'll be a light switch, and go in the back of the incinerator and throw all this stuff in it. So he did what he was asked to do. He took the elevator down, and he went he found the room, he turned on the light switch. He said the light came on, but it was pretty dim. And he made his way over towards the incinerator, and he said it was just the weirdest feeling. He quickly threw all the stuff in there as fast as he could and got out of there. And he said it was so weird that they kept asking me to take stuff. He said I would only go there if someone would go with me. And he said one time I went, someone was with me. We went down to the incinerator. We got a cart full of stuff, and we opened it, turned on the light, and there's a puddle of blood on the floor. And it wasn't something that dripped off the cart. It's just a puddle of blood. He said I walked over to it. I kind of walked around it a couple of times, and then poof, it disappeared. He said later on, I was working upstairs and I looked at the cuff of my pants, and my pants were soaked in blood. So Kandra has a story that she wants to share about this site.
Yeah, so one winter evening, I was doing the tour, and we had stopped in that circle there in front of the Drury, right next to Marion Hall. And I was telling a few of the stories that we know, Peter's stories. And I had a group of about probably 15 people. And this young couple walks up to me. They were coming down the street, and they walk up to me and they say, "Are you doing a ghost tour?" And I said, "Actually, yeah, I am." And they said, "Well, we're staying here at the Drury, and we have a story for you." And I said, "Wow, that's awesome. Would you like to tell the whole group?" And they said, "Sure." So, so I turned the tour sort of over to this young couple, and I'm echoing. Does anyone else hear that?
Yes.
Anyway, so I let them tell their story, and what they told me, and they told the group, was that they were staying in the Drury up on the 4th floor, and I believe they were in room 415. And they said the night before, they had been watching movies on YouTube, or no, I'm sorry, they were watching movies on Hulu on their laptop. So they were sitting on the bed, watching some movies, and they said that their screen kept fuzzing out, and then these YouTube videos would pop up. And it was videos, and they said they were from China, these videos of amputations happening, people having limbs cut off in hospitals, but they were like these videos of this happening. And it happened to them 3 times, and they couldn't figure out why. They said they didn't even have the YouTube app on their laptop, so they didn't know how this could happen. So they went down to the front desk, and they told, the person working there that this really strange thing was happening. And the desk clerk said, "I can't really talk to you about this, but I think you should go back and talk to our manager." So she took them down, and they talked to the manager. And apparently the manager asked them to sit down, and he said, "As a matter of fact, you're in room 415, and right next to you, the room right next to you, we've had to actually close down because there's so much paranormal activity that happens there. We don't even let guests stay there. But, we didn't know there would be so much paranormal activity in your room." But what he told them was, "It's interesting that you should have this experience and these videos popping up of amputations, because that was the amputation wing of the hospital, 4th floor." And I couldn't believe, anyway, so that's what they told us. And so I asked them, "Okay, wow. So did you change rooms, or did you get a new hotel?" And they said, "Actually, no, we're on our way back up there right now. We can't wait to see what's going to happen tonight." And they said, "Okay, you're definitely braver than I would be." So that's just a little experience I had on one of my tours.
Great. That's a great story. Kandra, you can't see the chat, and I don't know others who can either. I can't see the participants, but I want to just read you a couple things about that. My deceased uncle used to work in the morgue at the hospital. He always heard voices and saw apparitions. There were a couple of, somebody's husband was born in the building. My grandmother died at La Residencia. It was very creepy. It was creepy. There's a couple more here, just in case some of you can't read them or don't want to. I heard a story at the old hospital in which a boy got something into a bad car accident in the 1950s, later died in one of the rooms. I think it was 311, I believe. I've heard this story.
I've heard that one.
And
I
after
still
that,
hear
it
him
became
crying,
haunted.
right?
right, and I think it's from 311. There's two people that wrote it, unless it's a repeat of the same person. It is. Robert's on here twice.
Lots of
Okay.
experience at the
Jessica
hospital.
suggests that we mute each other when we're talking, Cam, so that we don't echo. When I'm talking, you mute yourself. I'll mute myself when you talk. Okay.
I'm going to mute
Okay,
myself
so
right now.
we're going to move along. Now we're going to move down to the plaza itself, or down further down Palace Avenue to the old Palace restaurant for a brief stop, so then we can get up to La Pasada. Those of you who've never heard of La Pasada, Santa Fe's most famous ghost, who's been featured in Unsolved Mysteries. Those of you that are adults may remember that program. Don't know that it's still on cable anymore. But in 1994, she was the featured guest. She was on another cable program, I can't think the name now, and then another one called Celebrity Ghost Stories, where a member of the Sopranos cast and his girlfriend had experiences with a ghost there. Her name is Julia. And there's now a book that one of us will talk about called American Ghost, written by the great-great-granddaughter, nationally released book that's done very well. Great-great-granddaughter of the famous ghost there. So we're going to go there last, but let's go to the Palace Avenue briefly. Some of you remember the Palace restaurants had various owners over the years. One of the original buildings, not the ones that are standing today. This, by the way, this is west of the plaza. The Druid is east of the plaza. Those of you trying to place these things. I don't remember the exact address of the palace. It's not that important. But anyway, a former owner of that land and a business there was a woman named Doña Tulas. That was her nickname. Everyone called her this. This is in the early 1800s or the 1830s, 40s, 50s. Her full name was Gertrudis Barcelo. Several books about her. She owned a drinking establishment, dance hall, and some say bordello that she ran at that site. We believe the entrance was from Burro Alley. Palace Restaurant is on the corner of Burro Alley and Palace Avenue. You know it. And just a quick comment about her. She's a very powerful, influential woman. Women had more power than in Mexican and Spanish times than American women did. Anyway, one historian said Armijo was governor 3 times in the Palace of Governors and had the political power. He's from a wealthy, powerful New Mexico family, the Armijo family, Manuel Armijo. Kearny, so we're here at 1846. General Kearny's here now with his whole army. But this historian said the true power lay in the hall, in the home or business of Doña Tulas. She was said to be the wealthiest woman in town and provided the payroll for the U.S. Army. She was asked to give the money, and she thought, "Oh, we're going to have to pay to do this," and they said, because she was used to paying bribes. They said, "No. What interest do you want?" Anyway, it's an interesting story about her. Just knowing that that's what the place. The history of that place there, of that spot. Back in the 1990s, the Palace restaurant was owned by a man named Lino, and I believe his last name is Petrosini. He owns Lino's Pizzeria and the Osteria, which many of you will know that are currently running. He gave up the restaurant a number of years ago when he opened the Osteria. But Lino used to have in the dining area, beautiful, and some of you may have been and eaten at the restaurant when he had a very nice Italian restaurant there. He's from Lake Como. Beautiful white tablecloths, white napkins that would be folded standing up in front of your place. And Lino would tell me it would happen not every day, it didn't even happen every week, but several times a month, and it might happen several weeks in a row, that in the very first booth, as you enter the dining room on the right, people would sit down, they'd be escorted to to have their meal there, and they grab their napkin and it would be soaking wet. And they tell the waiter, "These napkins are all wet." And the waiter would say, "They were perfectly dry when I folded them a few minutes ago." And what Lino said, they did some investigation. What they really think was that why those napkins got wet was a story that was famous dating back to the time of Doña Tulis and her dance hall, that one of the dance hall girls who was in love with a military man, and the U.S. Army forces tended to go. There were many gambling sites in Santa Fe. People gambled on the streets. Many of the American soldiers coming up from Mexico at the end of the war were aghast. But anyway, there was a story of a military man whose girlfriend was one of the dance hall girls. And he was gambling and he got into a big dispute with someone and he's shot and killed. And his girlfriend hears the shots, comes over and sees who it is and throws herself upon him, wailing and weeping. And Lino and the other employees felt that those napkins got wet due to the tears of this woman who was still there. Much more recently, when the restaurant was still open, I'm not sure when it closed, but I know it isn't open now, a waitress there, her father came to get a hamburger. And he was served the hamburger, and all of a sudden this woman walked up. Kandra, do you have the photo of the mantilla or no? She was wearing a mantilla and dressed in what was more 19th century, 1800s kind of clothing, and says, "Welcome to the Palace Restaurant." He says, "Thank you. Have a wonderful meal." He said, I'm enjoying it. I'm looking forward to it. And then she turns around and leaves. But he thought it was very odd because she looked so out of place. So he talked to some of the employees and heard that they felt the place was haunted. So he said, let's look at the security camera. So there were security cameras. They went and looked at the tape of what had just happened, would have been filmed. And there he was talking to no one. The woman he saw, the woman he spoke with, did not show up in the security camera. And as our friend John, who does the tour sometimes with us, says, the best electricians are ghosts. Anyway, late at night, at the psychic hour or the witching hour, a lot of people say midnight, but it's actually 3 a.m. If any workers were still there, the lights would go off. And they took it as a message that it's time for them to leave. The ghosts wanted the place to themselves for the night. So let's move on, Kandra, here before we run out of time.
Okay, so yeah, this is an artist's rendition of what Doña Tulis might have looked like. And then there's just another photo I found of Doña Tulis. Okay, so we're going to move on to the La Pasada, right? I'll turn it back over to you so you can tell them the history.
I muted myself, but yeah, that certainly looks like the library in La Pasada. It doesn't look exactly like that now. Those photos aren't up anymore, those paintings aren't up anymore. And the couch, well, anyway, so the library, some of you will know it in La Pasada on the ground floor. La Pasada, for those of you who are not aware, is a hotel on Palace Avenue also. Further east of the Druid, it's across Paseo de Peralta. So the hotel itself, the lobby area, is part of the property of a family known as the Staab family. Actually, this photo is taken inside what is called the Staab house, S-T-A-A-B. There it is, a picture of it from late 1800s, I guess, early 1900s. Three-story French Empire style building, mansard roof, finished about 1881, I believe, around then, early 1880s. It must have stuck out like a sore thumb in Santa Fe when everything else is adobe 1 or 2 stories. You have this building. And so how did it get built? Who built it? Why? And who's the ghost? It's so famous that even a book has been written about it that is done very well. In the 1850s, there were many people emigrating to the United States from Germany. Young men were Germany wasn't a united country, it was different German republics. They were being conscripted into the army, and a lot of them wanted to get away. And they fled, and a lot of them immigrated to the United States. A big contingent of German-speaking people arrived in St. Louis. And amongst them were two brothers, Abraham and Zadok Staab. Abraham is the important one here. Abraham was only in his teens. I've heard different dates, about some say 15, some say 17. But anyway, attached or starting in Missouri, as some of you may know, Western Missouri was the old Santa Fe Trail. It was the route to New Mexico from Missouri that had been running from the 1820s up to this point. So Abraham and his brothers were his brother. There are other brothers, but the two brothers, he and Zadok, travel down the Santa Fe Trail, arrive in Santa Fe in the mid-1850s, and they open a mercantile shop in the Plaza. Somebody says that they may have also had a trading post. They do very well. They apply to the Army, the U.S. Army. This is right after the Mexican War. Within the first decade, the U.S. Army is setting up forts all throughout the Southwest. They need supplies. They apply to be the settlers or suppliers to forts. They get the contract. They're doing very, very well financially. And when the author of the book, it's called American Ghost, her name is Hannah Nordhaus, came to La Pasada when the book came out, she did a reading and someone else spoke about the family. There's the book, Kandra's holding it up. Good book, a lot about the family. It's not only about the ghost, but the whole premise of the book is about the family lore of her great-grandmother being a ghost, still there. Someone spoke about the family at this reading and said that Abraham became one of the leading suppliers to the Union Army in the 1860s. Think about that kind of contract and the money that he must have taken in. So he was one of the very first millionaires in New Mexico, known to be one of the first four, and to have several $1 million in the early 1860s is a lot of money when you think of inflation. So he had all the money in his life, but he's missing something in his life. And that was it rhymes with life. And that was, as I hope you got the W word, I wasn't thinking knife, wife. And he goes back, he didn't look around the United States like many immigrants, went back to their home country. In this case, he came from Westphalia, the German Republic, a little town called Lugda. He meets a young woman named Julia Schuster, and they fall in love. And they get married, and he brings her back to Santa Fe. They take the first class on the fastest ship because he's got the money to do that, carriages, and they arrive in Santa Fe in 1866. And Julia, who came from upper class European society, must have been a little dismayed to find the dirt roads, nothing paved, no stone streets or anything, and all the buildings in adobe. But she learned to love it, or she lived here the rest of her life in any case. And friends who knew Julia, I think this is important to the story, would say they never met anybody that felt his emotions as deeply as she. And we may hear a little bit about that when we just hear in her history, her sensitivity. So between 1866 and 1875, she has 7 children. That's quite a few in that short period of time. Those of you that are mothers, I'm sure most of you haven't experienced that. And Abraham is now planning to build a house. They originally, by the way, lived over on Burro Alley. But by the 1870s, he's thinking about building a house, taking his money, building a lovely home for them there. He buys land, and bringing materials from Europe and workers from Europe. He spared no expense. Eventually, this house is done. Takes a few years. Julia gets pregnant again, but has a miscarriage. She gets pregnant again. There she is, famous for having her hair up like that. Some people sometimes see her. Often the hair is up. Anyway, she has another miscarriage and another miscarriage. And Kandra and I are not quite sure on the exact number, but we've heard maybe as many as 10. Isn't that right, Kandra? You can nod, you're muted, but isn't that something like that? She had many miscarriages. 1883, they're living in the house, and she gets pregnant again. And this time she gives birth to a baby girl. Henrietta, I believe, is her name. And she was overjoyed after these miscarriages, just absolutely overjoyed. I'm sure Abraham was overjoyed as well. Tragically, it wasn't uncommon for that time for young children, young infants, to catch diseases. This child caught something and only lived 2.5 weeks, and Julia was crushed. And it is said that she refused to leave her room. I heard this story in the 1990s from somebody in Santa Fe, and then it was printed in a magazine article written by the author of the book. So it came down in the family stories as well. She wouldn't leave her room for a long time. Some say weeks, some say months. But when she came out, her dark hair had turned white. It was said that her grief had come out in her hair. The Staabs are famous for parties. That third floor was mainly an open area for parties. Any VIP visiting Santa Fe, like former President Grant and his wife staying at the Exchange Hotel, now La Fonda. Big party for them, party for General Sherman. Various parties went on. And so after this daughter died, Julia loved to entertain. They continued to have parties, but these things were weighing down upon her. In the 1890s, she kind of goes over the edge with her sensitivity. And no one is ever invited to that house for a public event, a party of any sort. There are no reports in the newspaper there have been of all the Staab parties ever again when she gets ill. Some friends come to see her. He takes her twice to Germany to try to get better medical care, but after 3.5 years, she dies from this illness, which seems to be both physical and mental. The 7 children, Abraham lives another 17 years, 7 children inherit the property, and they sell it, and there's a fire. So the building, if you go see it today, is only 2 stories, the old central part of the hotel, the Staab house. And then another owner buys some extra property and starts putting buildings in and making a hotel out of it. So there are a lot of buildings around the old house, and things start happening. There are so many stories. Kandra and I could easily spend probably an hour and a half on Julia Staab's stories. I recommend, if you want to know more than a couple we do here, I'm going to do one quickly, and then she'll do one, and then maybe we can ask Mona to do her story, and we'll have to wrap up. Is that okay, Kandra? So the story I think I'll pick is one. There used to be a concierge named Jack. He may be here. It'd be great if he was one of the 200 and some people listening or watching. Jack was a concierge. They used to sit in the lobby. They've been moved around several times just recently, but Jack would be there when I would come in on Saturday night often. He would be there with a group for a ghost tour. And Jack had experiences with Julia. He would investigate, and all the employees would send guests who had experiences with her. And Jack told me he was pretty empathetic. And he would, for guests of the hotel, if he was free, he loved to tell a story or two to them. And he told me the following story. He said a couple came to him. This woman there was a man behind her, just quiet. And she says to him, I've read the book about Julia Staab. I understand you know all about her. Could you tell me more about her? And he said, you know, I've got time. If you have time, let's go walk in the old house. Because the lobby I didn't explain, was added on. It wraps around the house. And the restaurant and lobby, they wrap around the house. So they go into the house, and Jack goes down by one of the restrooms where there's some great stories that take place, both the men's and the ladies' room. He goes by the bar. In the old part of the house is converted into a bar. He tells a story there. Then he walks into the library in that room where Kandra showed the picture with me with a group. In that room, there's a beautiful glass chandelier. Now, you know, the property went through many owners, different hotel owners, so the furnishings are not the Staabs, but the fixtures, such as you can see in the staircase here, this beautiful little lantern, metal lantern is there. There's beautiful carving on the stairway. That all dates back to the original house. So there's this beautiful glass. Most of the rooms downstairs have chandeliers. There's a beautiful glass chandelier in the the library. So Jack said when they started when they got up to go tell stories, to head towards the hallway and the bathroom, the husband said to him, Jack, I'm coming along, but please know I don't believe in ghosts. Jack said, that's okay. So he's told a couple of stories. They walk into the library, and the husband says, Jack, you've told 3 great stories. I like your stories, but you can't convince me there's a ghost here, much less the ghost exists anywhere. I need real proof. Well, Jack said they were standing on the rug right by that chandelier, and it began to sway noticeably back and forth, going back and forth. And it has little pendants, glass pendants below the glass lights. The whole thing's going back and forth, and they're just looking at it. Jack said there was no window open. The back door wasn't open, no window going through. Anybody in the guest room upstairs that was jumping up and down, there was no one doing that, and it wouldn't go side by side if that was happening. He said it's going, the 9 of the 10 pendants at the bottom of this light are going back and forth with the lights, but there's one that just starts twirling and twirling and twirling and twirling. And the husband says, Jack, I think there's something to what you're talking about here. So Kandra, let me mute myself.
Okay, yeah, I love that story. It's a great story. So I'm just going to tell you one of my favorite stories about La Pasada. And this is a story that I heard from Peter. And I also have a small personal experience that I'll share at the end. But this story happened one September. And in Santa Fe in September, it's usually pretty warm, right? Most of you know. But this specific September, there had been a cold snap, and it got very, very chilly very early in the season. So the story went that at La Pasada, the maintenance person who knew how to light the boiler in that old house was on vacation. So he wasn't there, and no one else knew how to light the boiler. So guests started calling in to the front desk and saying, it's really cold. Can you get the heat on? And the concierge said, we're working on that. We're trying to find someone who can do that. They called over actually to La Fonda and said, do you guys have anyone who might be able to come light this old boiler, because no one here knows how to do it. But they were searching, and they kept getting call after call. And apparently the concierge got one final call, and what he heard was, my guests are cold. And he said, oh, ma'am, I'm so sorry. Can we send up blankets? We're trying to get the heat on. And he heard a very deep sigh. And then he heard, I will take care of it myself. Click. And the person hung up on him. And he thought, wow, we got a really angry guest. But half an hour later, the heat came on, and no one had been there to light that boiler. So the concierge says that he thinks that Julia was there taking care of her guests, and she was able to get the heat on because they couldn't explain how it came on. So that's one of my favorite stories. Something that happened to me, I have to tell you, I just really love this book, American Ghost, written by Hannah Nordhaus. And I've read it, I've listened to the audiobook twice. But what happened to me was my daughter goes to school near the Plaza, and we used to live on the north side of town, and I would have to drive by La Pasada twice a day to take my daughter to school and then to go and get her. One day I took her to school and dropped her off, and she had forgotten her backpack. So I had to go home and get the backpack. So I drove, and I was at the time listening on my audio, in my car on the audiobook, listening to American Ghost. And I left the school and I drove, up Paseo de Peralta to go to my house. And as I approached La Pasada, the light turned red and I had to stop. And at that point, my audiobook just clicked off. And, I played with some buttons, but I couldn't get it to come back on. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And I went on up the street, went to the house, got the backpack. On the way back down to the school, I took a phone call, so I wasn't listening to my audiobook. But I dropped off the backpack and I got back in the car and I thought, you know what, I'm going to start my audiobook again. So I did, and it was played fine at the school. I started back up Paseo de Peralta and I was listening to the book. And as I didn't hit, the stoplight did not turn red, it was green. But as I passed La Pasada, my audiobook clicked off again and would not come back on. And I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. But I got home and I started thinking about why that might have been. And there's an interesting point in the book where the author, Hannah Nordhaus, she's talking about Julia, and she's talking about how there's some speculation that Julia might have had an affair with the Archbishop Jean-Baptiste Lamy. And that was the part of the book I was listening to that I actually happened to be on that day. So I decided that Julia just did not like that part of the book, and that's why my audiobook would not play when I passed La Pasada.
That's
So.
great. Thank
But
you,
I would highly
Kandra.
encourage anyone who's interested in these stories to read that book. It's really well written, and it's a beautiful story and this beautiful quest that Hannah Nordhaus goes on to find out who her great-great-grandmother was and why this spirit might still be at La Pasada.
Yeah, she hires psychics, things like that too,
Right.
in the book. So somebody, Maria says here, I stayed in the haunted room. That would be Julia's bedroom. We didn't tell stories in her bedroom. Kandra has a photo of this fellow with scratches on his back, actually. I don't know if you have it there. But anyway, I stayed in the haunted room in the mid-90s. It was really terrifying. We checked out in the middle of the night. So Maria, I know several stories of people who rented the room and left before, in the middle of the night, or even one case of one couple before it was late night. Some things were happening that they just asked to be changed out of their room. One of them,
the story is Chris Christopherson stayed there and asked.
Chris Christopherson,
and left.
Yeah, was here doing a movie. Left the room in the middle of the night. Yeah. So we were gonna. I don't know if Mona is still here, because Mona's had several experiences with Julia, and I thought we just did that before we ended. Maybe we can take a question or two. By the way, one of the questions is Staab House still there? At La Pasada, the main lobby is wrapping around public rooms, which is the old house on the first floor, and second floor, their guest rooms. And you go have a drink in the bar. You go have a drink in the bar. You may have a drink with Julia. They serve a Julia Rita there. It's
one
a
of
margarita.
my favorite parts of the tour is, I'm sorry to interrupt, Peter. One of my favorite parts of the tour is, we tell the history outside and we say, does this look like a Victorian mansion? People say no, because it's adobe and stucco, they've completely covered over the mansion, and you can see a few windows and that's about it. But you go into this Spanish colonial style lobby, and then you go and you stand in front of what used to be the porch of the house, and you can tell the porch was once outside. But once you go up those steps and you see this beautiful Victorian door, and you step into this Victorian mansion, and it's such a stark contrast to that lobby that you've been in, right, Peter? It's pretty magical, I think.
Yeah, yes. It's like two different worlds. Some people just love, if you've never been there, it's well worth seeing the house and the new hotel there. Several people said they have photos of Julia on the staircase. But I don't know if Mona's here. Jessica, are you able to get a hold of Mona? I certainly can't. Oh, Kandra's putting up an orb. Is he putting up an orb?
I put up the picture of the staircase, but I can put up we had tour guests that took these few pictures of orbs I can show you, which I think are interesting. There's the orb. And then here it is blown up, and you can see a face. I can see a face. That
was the library also, right?
Right.
In the library.
And there's one more here in the window. When you blow that up, it looks like someone in a cloak or a hood, if you can see the face in that orb.
So Jessica, Mona says she's there. I don't know if you can unmute her to tell a story we've gone our hour. But
can you hear me?
I can hear you. Is that Mona?
That's Mona. Okay, I have enough stories that you could write 3 more books about her. But I first saw Julia in the early 1970s. I was working my first day at work, 6 o'clock in the morning, and I walked into work and she was right at the top of the stairs within the first 5 minutes of walking in. And I could see her completely from head to toe, every single detail about her, clear as day. She wasn't transparent, but when you saw her, she also was not solid looking, even though you could see her in every single detail. She was wearing a long green dress. She had a very tiny waist, her hair up, and the green was a color you don't see anymore, really old-fashioned green. She was crying. And that was what originally piqued my interest. And I began going back continuously and researching her, telling her I was there and I wanted to talk to her. I never talked to her as though she were a ghost. I talked to her as though she were a friend and I was having a conversation. And she was always very, very willing to have a conversation. Can you still hear me? Can you still hear me?
Yes,
I can. Yes, I can hear you, Mona.
Okay, so she
I hope
told me
everyone's.
she told me several stories. I asked her what her trip was like coming over from Germany. She told me she was sick to her stomach the entire time. And then when she got off the boat, she had to get on a stagecoach, and the whole trip frightened her. And she said it was very dusty, dirty. There were robbers on the road. That she was just horrified coming to the whole trip horrified her. She pointed out things in her house that had been changed over time. Like in the library, she would point to the ceiling and go, "Look what they did to my ceiling." And she was very upset about changes in the house. She told me she had caught Abraham with a Spanish maid and that they had a big fight about it. He was the one having affairs, not her. She, I can't even begin to tell you all the stories, but she told me all sorts of things. I think the problem was that she was very psychic and people mistook it for her being crazy. She was not crazy, she was psychic. And that was what the problem was. I stayed in her house with my daughter and a friend one night up in her bedroom. My daughter was doing a documentary film and filming in there, all orbs all over the film. And it was a really cold night. Julia made the room so incredibly hot, and she stood at the bottom of the bed and laughed and said, "You're like little sausages in the frying pan." And I thought, that's a European expression she's trying to convey to me. There was the sound of dripping blood in her bedroom coming down from the fireplace, which at that point had been blocked off. And I don't to this day know what that was coming from, nor do I know how I knew it was the sound of dripping blood. It was really loud. And in the morning, the third woman who was there with us in the room said the same thing to me, like, "Did you hear the blood dripping all night?" Um, I don't even know where to begin. There are so many stories about her that I have. One
Thank,
time,
thank you,
I'll tell you
Mona.
one more
One
really
more
quick one.
quickly, one more
One
quickly,
time,
because I think it's time to
yeah,
go.
one real quick. One time I went there and I couldn't see her, and I said, "Julia, let me know you're here." And she opened the big heavy door leading out to the patio, extremely slowly, all the way opened, and then closed it just as slowly to let me know she was there.
That's a great story. All those are great stories. Thank you, Mona.
You're
It's
welcome.
wonderful. So I think if there are a couple of quick questions you want to put in the chat, I don't think we're going to need people to do that. You can. Please know that if there are opportunities to take tours now, they just have to be small groups. And the way you do that, I know originally at the head of the chat, there's the website, or you just do a search for the original Santa Fe Ghost Tour. You can only during COVID do custom tours. We can't do public tours, but we love to have you on a tour. And Kandra and I and John, who does the tours sometimes, we all take requests. The stories and places to go. We're flexible. Any questions? Have you ever been afraid on one of the tours? Asking me personally, I've never been afraid on one of the tours. I personally, although I once had an experience on a tour, I try not to have any kind of higher sense perception of any paranormal during a tour, because I'm trying to hold the group together, figure out what I'm doing next, take care of people's needs. So on the tour, never been afraid. How about you, Kandra?
Yes, I have. I had a group of teenage girls that I took out on the tour. They were a drill team from Texas. And we were over at the Inn at Loretto. We're out in the parking lot, and I was telling a story about Sister Mary and George. And the hotel was behind me. And all of a sudden, these teenage girls started screaming. I was in the middle of a story, and there was a window with a curtain that was fluttering out behind me, but it scared me when they screamed, and they were afraid that it was the ghost. So yeah, that was one thing.
So we have a couple of other questions. One was that I read. Oh, somebody said, have you done tour La Fonda? Our public tours on Friday night used to always start at La Fonda. I know 6 or 7 stories of different ghosts in La Fonda. We usually include La Fonda as part of a tour, depending where we start, you know, how far people want to walk, if it's not near there, especially on these custom tours. But we often start the tour from La Fonda for whoever, Kathy asked that question.
Here's a picture of you at La Fonda telling some stories.
Yeah, there I am back behind the restaurant.
And that was on Halloween. That's why he's got the wig on.
Yeah, where the wig and the nose, where the people have spotted the bride. There's a famous bride that people see in Santa Fe, and this is one place that someone got a photo of her, actually, near this, where I'm standing there. And I may be missing other questions. Please excuse me, the things are going. Thank you all for your thanks. I thank you for coming. It was our pleasure, right, Kandra?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Thank you both for being here.
Yeah.
And thank everyone for joining us this evening. You can visit the original Santa Fe Ghost Tour.weebly.com. Get your own personal tour. Thank you to Santa Fe Public Library for sponsoring events like this. And be sure to check out the Santa Fe Public Library calendar for more of our upcoming events. Michael McGarry is joining us next Tuesday. Then Radford's back on Wednesday. And Jane Phillips, our local Ghostbusters psychic, is here on the 29th.
Jane Phillips has been on my tour. She's very good.
Yay! Excited to
I
have
know
her.
her. She came on the tour one night many years ago.
And maybe we'll have Mona and some of you back, and we can do a kind of a Campfire Tales event where we each have time to share our happenings.
Great idea, Jessica.
Well, thank you, Original Ghost Tour of Santa Fe. You guys are the best.
It's a pleasure being with you all. Hope to see you around town.
Yeah, happy haunting, stay safe, read books, and have a good night.
Thanks, Jess.
And go spooking about. Thanks a lot.